I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey lurkers, welcome to this week's episode. Before we get started, I have a quick shout out for this episode to Gabrielle. I met Gabrielle's parents at the Sasquatch Festival in Whitehall, New York. Sadly, Gabrielle wasn't able to go because of her work schedule. So sorry I missed you, Gabrielle. Thank you so much for being a loyal lurker, and thanks to your parents for stopping by, saying hello, and getting a selfie. For this week's episode, we are traveling south to check out a lake with some strange happenings. We covered another lake with some creepy legends back in episode 128, Georgia's haunted Lake Lanier. This time, we're headed to eastern Texas and western Louisiana to a place called Caddo Lake. If you have any streaming services, you might have heard the name recently, since there is currently a movie called Caddo Lake from the mind of M. Night Shyamalan. I have not watched the movie yet, so I can't say if it's going to have anything to do with the actual legends of the lake, which basically is why I didn't bother to watch it. I didn't want to be influenced. Caddo Lake is 25,400 acres. It includes a lake and a bayou, or a wetland, and borders Texas and Louisiana. It is specifically in northern Harrison County and southern Marion County in Texas, and western Caddo Parish in Louisiana. The lake and bayou are internationally protected wetlands under the Ramsar Convention, and it includes one of the largest flooded cypress forests in the United States. Caddo is one of Texas's few non-oxbow natural lakes. In case you're wondering, an oxbow lake is a lake formed when a bend or oxbow in a river is cut off, leaving a freestanding body of water. People have inhabited the area for around 12,000 years, and the lake itself was named for the Caddo or Caddoan Native American tribe. The Caddoans were also the Caddo Nation, which was a confederacy of several Native American tribes who at one time inhabited what is now Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. The Caddoans were known as diplomatic people and actually became allies with both the Spanish and French explorers who arrived in the area. Unfortunately, the Spanish and the French were not so peaceful. Both wanted territory occupied by the Caddo Nation, and so they fought. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase happened, and then in 1835, the Caddo Nation signed a treaty with the U.S. government, and they were relocated to a reservation in Oklahoma. As far as the lake's formation, Caddo legend says the lake was formed around 1811 to 1812 with the New Madrid earthquakes. According to one legend, a Caddo chief's failure to obey the Great Spirit caused an earthquake that created Caddo Lake. And if you're not familiar with the New Madrid seismic zone, it is located in southeastern Missouri, northeastern Arkansas, western Tennessee, western Kentucky, and southern Illinois. It's the most active seismic area in the United States, east of the Rocky Mountains. It is famous for a series of 3 major earthquakes, believed to have been magnitude 7 or larger, which occurred in the 2-month period between December 16, 1811 and February 7, 1812. In addition, hundreds of moderate earthquakes, magnitude 5 to 6.5, and thousands of smaller, magnitude 4 to 5 earthquakes occurred in between the larger earthquakes, and continued shaking the area for several months. These earthquakes were felt and recorded in personal journals as far away as Louisville, Kentucky, and Cincinnati, Ohio. You might want to think about adding major New Madrid earthquake onto your bingo card. With the way things have been going, it could be that or the eruption of the Yellowstone caldera. That's what I'm expecting next. Anyway, most geologists believe that the lake was formed before the New Madrid earthquakes by formation of the Great Raft, a 100 miles log jam on the Red River in Louisiana. This likely caused flooding of the existing low-lying basin. According to a 1913 to 1914 survey that dated timber there, the lake formed in about 1770 to 1780. The Great Raft consisted of uprooted trees piled in the river for over 80 miles. For centuries, spring flooding eroded riverbanks, toppled trees, and increased log jams. The raft disrupted river flow and water spilled into Louisiana's Cypress Valley, forming a lake around 1800. The Great Raft was eventually cleared in 1835. Then oil was discovered below Caddo Lake during the 1900s oil boom. The Gulf Refining Corporation dammed the lake to raise the water level to accommodate oil drilling equipment in 1914. Texas tried to preserve parts of Caddo in 1934 by establishing a 483-acre state park with trails, cabins, and other facilities. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers completed the current dam in Morningsport, Louisiana in 1971. The Long Arm Army Ammunition Plant was built on the shores of Caddo in the mid-20th century, and its operations polluted large portions of the surrounding wetlands until its closure in the 1990s. Most of the former plant site is now a federal wildlife refuge. In 1993, Caddo Lake preservation efforts were expanded. The Nature Conservancy had purchased 7,000 acres of Caddo Lake area and announced an agreement to merge this property with the 483 acres in Texas, Caddo State Park, creating the Caddo Lake State Park and Wildlife Management Area. It is home to all sorts of animals, including owls, snakes, frogs, waterfowl, bobcats, river otters, beavers, eagles, and alligators. It also was the site of a pearl rush after freshwater pearls of the highest quality were discovered there in the early 1900s. There are still pearls there in the lake. After the dam was constructed, the water rose too high for people to keep harvesting the mussels that housed the pearls. And now, let's get on with the creepier portion of our episode, beginning with a tragic steamboat disaster. The Mitty Stevens was a steamboat built in 1862. Union forces confiscated the Mitty Stevens to carry dispatches, troops, and supplies in the Red River Campaign. The Mitty Stevens had side paddle wheels to power herself through the waters, rather than the rear steam wheel. With Captain Homer Kellogg at the wheel on February 5, 1869, the Mitty Stevens began what was to be her last journey, from New Orleans to Shreveport to Morningsport in Louisiana to Turning Basin in Jefferson, Texas, on Caddo Lake. She carried passengers and cargo on this trip. Her cargo included 274 bales of government-consigned hay and a $100,000 payroll for Union troops stationed in Jefferson, Texas. Union troops were facilitating Civil War reconstruction in Texas at the time in 1869. After leaving Shreveport, the Mitty Stevens steamed up 12-mile bayou to get to Turning Basin on February 11th. She stopped briefly at Morningsport in Louisiana on the southeastern shore of Caddo Lake. When the Mitty Stevens was approaching Swanson's Landing inside the Texas border on Caddo Lake's southwestern shores, around midnight, a crewman found smoke coming from a bale of hay. According to historian Ron Holloman, it was almost midnight, but the captain wanted to make Jefferson by morning. He ordered the fire baskets lit. These big wrought iron baskets stuck out. It lit the way, big burning torch on the front. A spark ignited the bales. The hay fire spread incredibly fast. Panic and mayhem ensued, and 64 people died. The fire trapped passengers. One lifeboat was able to be launched, but quickly became overloaded. Many of the people on the only lifeboat drowned as a result. Other passengers jumped overboard to escape a fiery death, but the side paddle wheels sucked them in and they too drowned. Mitty Stevens' hull laid exposed in Caddo Lake for years, but no one sought to salvage it. Boaters out in Caddo Lake mention the sunken ships of pirates and smugglers who would often dump stolen cargo into the lake and connecting rivers back when steamboats could sail through. Before you smirk at the idea of pirates on a lake, it is a fact that moonshiners were known to operate in the area during the time of Prohibition, so it isn't a stretch that more modern pirates, not Blackbeard, and smugglers would be using the waterways and sinking boats. And those who died in the sunken boats were never found again. Remember, alligators. Jefferson, the nearby town, has records of ships that were either robbed or sunk before entering port. Coupled with the fact that the river and lake bed of Caddo are constantly shifting, making it impossible to map or even dredge the lake at times, almost all of the boats that sink are never recovered. It's impossible to know how many were claimed by the water during this time. As you might expect, their spirits are said to haunt the lake, at least according to those that work it for a living. Another story tells the tale of a weeping woman of the swamp. There was a young woman who would come to the lake to wait for her man who was in the military. They would meet in secret in the same place on the lake time after time. While she waited for him to return from whatever war he was fighting in, she would continue to return to their secret meeting spot on the lake. Then word came that he had died in battle, and still she went to their place on the lake, weeping into the water and mourning her loss. Then finally one day her family went to find her, but she wasn't there. They searched the whole lake, but they never saw her again. Alive, anyway. Tall and thin, with long hair obscuring her face, she stands in the bayou, and you can hear her sometimes weeping into the forest. Ghosts aren't the only thing lurking in the woods and waters of Caddo Lake. There's also stories of strange creatures. Like the Moss Man, not to be confused with Mothman. I said Moss Man, M-O-S-S. The story is that there was once a man who was followed by Spanish moss. The man was a guilty man and a dangerous one, who came once to the lake and there saw something he could never understand, some sort of creature pursuing him. After his visit and encounter, he kept finding Spanish moss in his pockets. Years after his visit, he'd end up with it in his eyes in the morning, in the crust of his sleep. Always there was some moss there. As he grew older, he would find more and more moss around him each day. When he eventually died, found in his garret, they say his whole body was filled, completely stuffed full of Spanish moss. The Caddo people also had strange creature legends, one of lost elves that live inside the hollow trees, haunting the forest and abducting humans and turning them into elves as well. And another called Kadaja, a gigantic, hideous, horned, man-eating ogre said to hate humans. Sometimes Kadaja, or devil, is described as resembling the horned winged serpent Uktena of the Cherokee legend, which we did mention in one of the Haunted Trails episodes. According to the transcribed stories, Kadaja was a devil, a demon, who rushed out of the bushes and attacked two maidens. Its red eyes blazed like hot coals. It was adorned with horns so wide the tips stretched beyond view. The sisters ran, but the monster captured one sister, who happened to be pregnant. The beast snatched her up into its claws and shoved her into its mouth, gobbling her up. The second sister managed to climb a tall tree, standing along the shore of a large pond, with waters black and deep. The tree was so tall, Kadaja could not reach her. He tried to climb but fell. He clawed and gnawed at the roots with his enormous teeth, trying to fell the tree. He rammed the tree with his massive horns, shook it and attempted to snap it, repeatedly bending it back and forth. Eventually the tree began to weaken. The girl knew her time was short, so she dove into the water to escape. Caddo sucked up all the water, intending to scoop her up once it was drained, but she was nowhere to be found. The maiden knew of an underground stream, the source that fed the pond. She had tricked the monster, escaping up the stream until it surfaced far away in a sunny area. Legend goes on to tell how the girl and her mother returned to the tree once Caddo had gone. They found the cap of an acorn with a single drop of blood in it. They returned home, and the mother placed the blood-stained cap in a covered pottery jar. That night they heard a scratching from the jar. They opened it to discover a little boy no bigger than the mother's little finger. Startled, they covered the jar once more. The next night, more scratching occurred. The jar burst open. Out stepped a handsome young man, the son of the deceased daughter. He was told the story of the attack, prompting Blood Drop Boy to seek vengeance. His grandmother created a bow and arrow for him. The next morning, Blood Drop Boy tracked the ogre. He drew and fired, hitting Caddo. The arrow sunk deeply into the beast, injuring but not killing him. Caddo ran off, supposedly never seen again. But perhaps Caddo still lurks deep within the forest. And what creepy lake would be complete without a lake monster? The Caddo spoke of a large aquatic animal, so large in fact that when killed and removed, the lake level declined. They also described a turtle so large it was thought to be an island, and a dance was held on its back. J. L. Wilson, a writer for the Shreveport Times, in March of 1969, broke the story of a 20-foot monster allegedly seen in Caddo Lake. Wilson reported his source, who saw this monster as very reliable, who doesn't drink, is pretty sharp, and not easily fooled. Other locals also notified Wilson that they had seen this thing. A 35-year-old Caddo Lake fishing veteran and friend was fishing near Swanson's Landing. He spotted a dark-colored creature estimated to be from 18 to 20 feet long, moving slowly along the surface of the water, with approximately 6 inches of its back and head above the surface. With all the hoopla soon surrounding the monster, the locals named her Cypress Cindy. We do not know how they knew this creature was a female. The witness reported that at first he thought it was a boat with its bottom turned up, but they kept watching and it started to move. A Mr. and Mrs. Thomas McLeod of Shreveport told Wilson that they had tied their boat to a tree while fishing for white perch near Fred Miller's old boat launch in Buzzard Bay. Then this creature ran into the McLeod's boat, capsized it, and spilled them into the water. The earliest recorded sighting dates back to a steamy morning in 1909, when a group of fishermen encountered something. "Never seen nothing like it before or since," recounted Old Man Jacobs, a grizzled fisherman whose family has lived by the lake since the Civil War. In the spring of 1909, Jacobs and his companions were out on the lake before dawn. As the mist clung to the surface of the water, they noticed an unusual disturbance, a wake that seemed too forceful for any known fish. Then an enormous snake-like head burst through the mist. Its eyes glowed red in the chill of the morning. "It was longer than my boat, and as real as the air I breathe," Jacob swore, recounting the tale to anyone who'd listen at the local tavern. Some suggest it could be a giant alligator gar, known for their size and prehistoric appearance, while others whisper of unknown species yet to be classified by modern science. Others believe it could be a lost manatee, though they only grow to 13 feet and certainly don't have any kind of speed to speak of. Interesting that the Caddo people believed there was a water spirit in the lake that protected the waters. And finally, we're going to mention everyone's favorite furry cryptid, Bigfoot. There are apparently quite a few sightings of Bigfoot in the Caddo Lake area, primarily during the off-season when there are fewer people around. One man shared this account. I camped at the lake in Caddo Lake State Park. I believe all of that is connected. It was in January of 2016. I was the only one in the campground except for the host, who left due to a family emergency. So I was there alone for several days. The second night there, something with 2 legs walked around my tent. I didn't see anything, but I heard and felt it. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I know I was alone in the park. I smacked the side of my tent and yelled, thinking it was a black bear. I heard it exhale, and it was well above my tent. I was pretty scared. I fell asleep 1 or 2 hours later, but I woke up about 6 a.m. and went outside. My cooler was open and my lunch meat and cheese was still untouched. I don't know what it was, but it made me think of Bigfoot. December of 1989, a hunter was up in his tree stand when he heard and saw something walking along the pipeline clearing. The creature was bipedal, and as he eased his scope to his eye to look closer at what he was seeing, the creature turned and looked right at him. As it continued to stare at the man, the creature backed up to the tree line and disappeared into the woods. October 2005, a man went to stay at his family's cabin. The first night he heard strange screams and vocalizations. The next morning, as he walked to the tree stand, he felt like he was being watched. He looked up and saw the head and shoulders of a creature peeking around a tree watching him. It was at least 7 feet tall, and as soon as eye contact was made, the creature took off and disappeared. Another interesting sighting happened in more recent years, basically in this millennium. A group of 3 brothers decided to go camping in the Caddo Lake Park. They camped together often, enjoying the time spent together fishing, with maybe a little bit of Bigfoot hunting. Which basically sounds like my family. Of the 3 brothers, the oldest, Brian, was a self-proclaimed skeptic who joined in on these trips more to spend time with his brothers than because he thought they would see anything interesting. They preferred to camp during the week when there weren't as many people camping in the park. They planned the camp Monday to Thursday, and when they arrived, they had their choice of campsites. They opted for one more out of the way and secluded. One thing they mentioned as odd was that while setting up camp, a ranger came by and stopped to chat. He offered them his phone number and told them not to hesitate to call if they witnessed something weird. That evening, after setting up camp, they fished a little, ate dinner, and had a campfire. But then a rainstorm moved in and the brothers retired to their tent for the night, around 10 or 11 p.m. They were all asleep by around 12:30 a.m. The middle brother, Jason, woke up because he heard something in the distance, and he then woke up his older brother, Brian. They listened to something walking around their campsite about 30 yards away, circling. Whatever it was walking heavily and breaking branches. This was between 1 and 2:30 a.m. Brian said he had been a hunter his whole life and was familiar with the sounds of wild hogs and deer, and these footsteps were nothing like those. All 3 brothers were hunters, and Jason is a science teacher. He went on to say that the footsteps were slow, heavy, lumbering steps traveling clockwise around their camp. He said it seemed like whatever it was trying to intimidate or scare them. The next morning, no one was in a hurry to get up early like they usually did. Eventually, they got up, went fishing, and ate lunch. It was overcast and raining again, so they opted to do a little hiking. They went to the edge of the park to a trail and began hiking. They each had walkie-talkies, and at one point, Brian and Jason continued on the same path, while Craig, the younger brother, split off to explore. The area where Brian and Jason walked had a ravine to one side and a barbed wire fence line on the other side. They walked along the fence for a bit, hugging the trail, and came upon something large obstructing the fence. It was a tree that was about 6 to 7 feet tall and so wide that they couldn't touch their fingers together while wrapping their arms around it. It looked like it had been thrown on the fence, as the tree line was a distance away from the area. The fence was slumped down and there were 2 puddles on either side of the fence from something repeatedly stepping over. At this time, Jason is a little worried that they haven't heard from Craig, and he leaves to go locate the youngest brother. Brian continues along the path. The ravine was to his left, and on his right the ground sloped upwards into a hill. Then he began to have a feeling that he was being watched. He heard something moving on the hill and a branch breaking. He caught a glimpse of an arm and torso with matted brown and burnt orange colored hair. The arm was pushing down brush so that whatever it was could get a good look at the brother, and as it realized it had been seen, it let go of the brush and the brush bounced back into place. Brian squatted down behind a tree and called his brother, Jason, on the walkie. The creature he had seen was large and only about 75 feet away, and still behind the brush. Jason arrived and crouches down behind the tree with Brian. He said Brian was actually teary-eyed and seemed to be in a state of shock. When asked what he had seen, Brian just pointed to the area where he saw the creature. They both could see a large mass behind a section of trees. There was no smell, though they were upwind from the creature. The woods were dead silent. No frogs, bugs, birds, nothing made a sound. Jason grabbed a stick and beat on a nearby fence post. The shadow in the brush never moved, but then they heard 2 knocks in reply. Craig called in on the walkie, and he said he was on his way to their location. At that point, a rock the size of a large man's fist came sailing down over Brian and Jason's head, and the creature was gone. As they could hear Craig calling out for them, they saw outstretched arms in the burnt orange color draped around 2 trees, rocking the trees back and forth. The trees were about 3 feet apart, and the creature filled in the space between them. It seemed like the creature was agitated from their brother yelling for them. The 2 trees shook, the shrubs rattled, and then everything was quiet as the thing ran off. The creature was around 7 feet tall and had a lot of mass. The brothers didn't go camping again for 4 years, and they don't frequent known Bigfoot areas anymore. Brian said that it was like the creature was stalking them, walking parallel to their position the entire time, and when he turned to look at something in the ravine, the creature took that chance to peer at him through the shrubbery. He said the thing had some intelligence, though it also was acting like an animal. Certainly a nerve-wracking encounter. So, who wants to go camping in Caddo Lake State Park with me? 'Cause it's on my bucket list now. And before I forget, there are some UFO sightings in the area. One happened in 1955, when the tower radioed to the pilot of a B-47 from the 513th Bomber Squadron that there was something on the radar. The United States Air Force pilot tracked an oblong-shaped object traveling northwest for 5 minutes before it was lost. There's more UFO stuff, but I'm going to save that for another time. And with that, that's going to do it for this episode. You can find all of our episodes and social media links on lurkpodcast.com, and you can find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you like what you hear, make sure you tell your friends, and maybe leave us a 5-star review if you have a moment. And until next time, keep lurking.